Inside a brightly lit police station, Keanu Reeves stood with his head slightly lowered. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across his face, deepening the wariness in his eyes. He wore a dark, slightly wrinkled shirt, its collar slightly open, revealing the silver crucifix resting against his chest. His fingers brushed against the cross absent-mindedly, a subtle act of defiance or perhaps a quiet plea for strength. Around him, several American police officers loomed, their crisp uniforms immaculate, their postures relaxed yet menacing, their faces twisted with amusement as they exchanged glances, nudging each other. One officer, a broad-shouldered man with a badge gleaming under the artificial light, leaned in, his voice thick with mockery. "Look at this guy," he sneered, pointing at the necklace. "What's this supposed to be, huh? Think that little trinket's going to save you?" Another officer burst into laughter, slapping his knee as if the mere sight of Keanu and his quiet faith was the funniest thing he'd seen all day. The group followed suit, their laughter growing louder, echoing through the sterile walls of the station. The room, once filled with the low hum of ringing phones and distant chatter, now vibrated with their taunts, thick with smug satisfaction. Keanu remained still. He didn't flinch. He didn't fight back. He simply stood there, absorbing their jeers in silence. His sorrow wasn't loud, it was carved into the lines of his face, resting in the weight of his shoulders. His fingers tightened around the cross, seeking comfort, seeking something more than the moment. The voices around him blurred into static, the harsh lights turning distant, as he held on to the only thing that still felt real. This keeps the atmosphere intense and emotional, while maintaining the open-ended nature of the scene. Officers, satisfied with their moment of amusement, turned their attention elsewhere. Papers rustled, the distant clatter of a typewriter echoed, and a phone rang unanswered. Yet Keanu remained still, his fingers wrapped around the crucifix, his eyes cast downward as if searching for something unseen. "Hey!" a voice cut through the room. It was the same officer who had pointed at the necklace. His amusement had faded, replaced by something colder. He stepped closer, his belt jingling slightly. "You got nothing to say?" Keanu exhaled slowly. His grip on the cross loosened, but his hand did not fall away. He lifted his gaze, not in defiance, not in anger, but with something deeper, a quiet endurance. The officer scoffed, shaking his head. "Fine, be that way." A door creaked open at the far end of the station. A woman in a neatly pressed suit stepped inside, her expression unreadable. The room quieted as she approached the desk sergeant, who merely nodded before gesturing toward Keanu. "That him?" she asked. The sergeant smirked. "Yeah, just standing there like a statue. Won't say much." She studied Keanu for a moment, her sharp eyes scanning his face, his posture, the faint crease between his brows. Then, with a short nod, she motioned toward the back of the station. "Bring him in." Two officers moved forward, their hands reaching for his arms. Keanu didn't resist. He let them guide him, his steps slow but steady. The hallway ahead was dimly lit, a stark contrast to the brightness of the main room. The air grew heavier with each step, the scent of stale coffee and old paper lingering. As they passed a row of holding cells, murmurs rose from within. Some inmates watched with idle curiosity, while others turned away, uninterested. Keanu remained silent, his eyes forward, his mind elsewhere. The door at the end of the hall swung open, revealing a small, windowless interrogation room. A single metal chair sat at the center of the room, a table in front of it. A flickering bulb buzzed overhead. "Sit," one officer ordered. Keanu complied. His fingers brushed the crucifix once more before resting his hands on the table. The woman in the suit entered, closing the door behind her. She set a thick folder on the table, its edges worn from use. She took a seat across from him, lacing her fingers together. For a long moment she simply observed him. Then she spoke. "You already know why you're here, don't you?" Keanu said nothing. She tapped the folder lightly, her gaze unwavering. "Then let's not waste time." The room fell into silence once more, the weight of unspoken words pressing down like a storm on the horizon. The woman flipped open the folder, her sharp eyes scanning the pages as if confirming something she already knew. The dim light flickered overhead, casting shifting shadows on the walls. "You've been quiet all night," she said, tapping a pen against the table. "Not a single word. Makes my job harder, but I don't mind a challenge." Keanu sat motionless, his gaze distant. His hands rested calmly in his lap, but there was a tension in his fingers, as if he was holding on to something invisible. The woman leaned forward. "You were found at the scene, middle of the street, blood on your hands, clothes torn. You weren't running, weren't hiding, just standing there, like you were waiting for us." Her voice was measured, professional, but there was an edge to it. She was searching for something in him, something beneath the silence. "You know the victim, don't you?" she asked, flipping a page. A grainy black-and-white photo slid toward him. A man lay sprawled on cracked pavement, his face partially obscured by shadow. Keanu's jaw tightened, his fingers twitched toward the cross at his neck but stopped short. The woman watched him carefully. "Still nothing?" she sighed, sitting back in her chair. "All right, let's try this another way. Witnesses say you were talking to him before he..." She paused, choosing her words. "Before it happened." She tapped the photo. "What did you say to him?" Keanu blinked slowly, his breath steady. Then, for the first time, he spoke, his voice quiet, almost distant. "I told him to run." The woman stilled. The officers behind the two-way mirror, unseen but listening, exchanged glances. She narrowed her eyes. "Why?" Keanu's fingers brushed the crucifix. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Because they were coming." The room fell silent. The flickering bulb above hummed softly, casting fleeting shadows across his face. The woman tilted her head. "Who's they?" Keanu exhaled through his nose, the faintest trace of something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You already know." For the first time, the woman hesitated. She glanced at the mirror, as if expecting an answer herself. The station beyond the interrogation room remained busy, officers talking, phones ringing, paperwork rustling. But somewhere in the distance, past the noise of routine, there was something else, a low, unnatural hum, faint, almost imperceptible. Keanu lifted his eyes, meeting the woman's gaze. His voice, when it came, was calm. "It's already too late."